Yes, sure. Yes, let's do a test question.
Oh, there they are in the Q&A.
Oh, cool.
Great.
Great.
Yes, we can see questions.
And you were live, Kay.
Okay.
Just
I
so
know,
you know.
I'm just testing all the technology.
As a reminder, you are alive.
While that's happening, for those who are watching this right now, we apologize. We know that the link was broken on Zoom. That was my fault, but you can click on the description that you should see in the post that you're watching on right now, and it should take you right to the Zoom webinar so that you can be a part of this. And now we turn it over to Rabbi Karen Krieger-Bogard and Dr. Michal Rauscher for an amazing evening.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of how to use this technology, which you saw me not using very well right before we started. But hopefully, if all goes according to plan, you can ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm also hoping to be on the CRC Facebook, Zoom, or the live stream to take questions. So hopefully you can submit your questions that way, and that should work well. Last week we had great questions, so please don't hesitate to ask anything that you think of. And so this week, with our university series, we are going to continue our discussion of feminism and orthodoxy. So last week, our class focused on Yeshivat Maharat and a lot about the Maharat movement, which is an Orthodox Jewish seminary for women who want to be clergy. And so we learned with Dr. Michal Rauscher, who we are so lucky to have here again with us this evening. Last week, we also had Maharat Rory Picker-Nice, who is the head of the JCRC here in St. Louis. And we talked about the ways the seminary came to be and the women who have learned there and studied there and what it now looks like to have Orthodox Jewish female clergy in our world today. And so throughout the week, I kept, thinking about this class that we had and some of the questions that were asked. And one of the things that kept popping into my head, one of these questions was, I wonder what it feels like to really go against the grain, to be like a trailblazer, but even more than that, to like know who you are and what you want and like what is right for you and to go after it with all your being. I really kept thinking about that and hearing the stories of these amazing women and what that must have felt like. And so tonight, we're going to move from one group of women who were creating a new path, these Maharats, to another story of feminism within Orthodox Judaism, this time specifically within Hasidic Judaism, which I'm sure Michal will touch on in just a moment. And so we're going to do this with the Unorthodox series and book. So as I said, we are really lucky to have Dr. Michal Rauscher back with us this evening. If you missed her last week, I'm just going to give a quick intro for her. She is an assistant professor of Jewish studies at Rutgers University. And before she moved to New Jersey, she was assistant professor of Judaic studies at the University of Cincinnati, which is where our paths crossed and our families crossed. It was a really wonderful 2 years. Dr. Rauscher conducted ethnographic research on reproductive ethics of Haredi, which is ultra-Orthodox Jewish women in Israel. And for 2 years, she interviewed ultra-Orthodox women in their homes in Jerusalem and spoke to them about their reproductive lives. Her book, which is based on this research, and I'm sure will be absolutely wonderful, will be published by Indiana University Press in November, and it is titled Conceiving Agency, Reproductive Authority Among Haredi Women. And for the last 4 years, Michal has been researching the ordination of women in Orthodoxy, which was our focus last week. And her publications and research lie at the intersection of the anthropology of Jewish women, reproductive ethics, and Israel studies. So we are so lucky to have her with us again this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to her to help us place Esty within her community. Like, sort of a big overarching question would be, what is her status and role as a Hasidic woman and as a person whose mom left the community, as someone who doesn't have a child within her first year of marriage, these kinds of pieces. I was hoping you could help us like place her within this community and give us other thoughts you have. So, yay.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Bogard. It's wonderful to be back with this group, talking about a different aspect of feminism and orthodoxy. I have been thinking a lot, as somebody who's studied ultra-Orthodox Jews, I've been thinking a lot and talking a lot about the Unorthodox TV series that I hope a lot of people on this call have seen, because there are going to be some spoilers. So I really don't want to cause any spoiler. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. Before I get started, what I talk about a lot in my research and what we're going to be talking about a lot now is reproductive ethics and reproductive practices among Haredi ultra-Orthodox Jewish women. And before I get started talking about that, I want to tell you about an organization that I support and that I've been supporting even more in the wake of police killings against Black individuals in this country. And that's an organization that supports reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is a movement founded and created by and increasingly for women of color. And I'm going to put a link in this. I put a link in the chat, so I think people who are on the Zoom call can see it, but maybe Rabbi Bogard, you can move it into the Facebook group. And you can read all about the organization there. I'm happy to talk about it more during the Q&A. But the fight for reproductive justice is a fight for Black women to have the same access and choices for reproduction that many other women have. So I encourage you to look more at it. So now we're going to get started talking about SD. Okay. So one thing is when we think about SD is Hasidic. Now, what does that mean? Hasidic is one of the branches under the umbrella term of Haredi or ultra-Orthodox. Within the Haredi umbrella, you could hear of Hasidic, you could hear Ashkenazi, Litvak, Yeshivish. These are all sort of different sects, Mizrahi Haredi, all different sects of ultra-Orthodox Jews. SD, and she represents Deborah Feldman, who is the author of the memoir Unorthodox, whose story SD is telling. She's from a Satmar Hasidic sect, so the Hasidic Haredi Jews then have a number of different sects that they follow. So if you imagine this like a tree, it's getting wider and wider. All of these sects follow particular rabbis that date back centuries. Now, it's easy to think that all Haredi Jews are the same. When we look at them in a group, we might say, oh, they all, they wear about the same amount of clothing, same clothing in the same way. They all cover their hair. They all, the men are all wearing black suits. But there are actually tons and tons of differences between the groups and even within a particular group. So there are differences in clothing, there are differences in theology, there are differences in ritual practice, there are differences in approaches to technology and the internet and jobs and the yeshiva. All of these kind of big and little differences are really significant when we study Haredi Jews. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And the last thing is, remember, SD is telling just one story, right? She's just representing SD. SD and her neighbor are going to have different experiences, right? We're going to think from the outside that they look the same. They, their husbands go to the same yeshiva. They, go to this, they observe Pesach the same way, Passover the same way. And so they must be, about the same. And they're really all going to have different experiences of being a Hasidic Jew. So that's another thing. And for those who have both watched this series and read the book, Esti's story in the TV series doesn't even mirror Deborah Feldman's story in the memoir. So just to point out sort of important differences, right? There are certain things that are the same. Deborah Feldman writes about crying when they shaved her head. She talks about her troubles in her marriage, but there are a lot of important differences, notably the way that they left. And why is that significant? It's significant because when Esty leaves Hasidic Jewry, and I promise, Rabbi Bogart, I will get to your question about what her status is. When Esty leaves, she leaves overnight, right? It kind of happens very quickly. And within 24 hours, she is shopping for jeans in a department store. Somehow she knows what size jeans she's supposed to wear, which when I was watching this, I was shocked because I've been living in jeans my whole life and I still don't know what size I'm supposed to wear. So the fact that Esty knew exactly what size she was supposed to wear, she could transform out of her clothing overnight, this identity that was, and this is something I think is really important for people to understand. It's something that I write about a lot. This identity is deeply embedded in their being, right? It's not something that can be, all of our identities are deeply embedded, right? They're not something that can be easily extracted when we move to a different country or get different friends. Even those experiences that are really miserable, that are really terrible or abusive or traumatic, those experiences can't be easily removed from our identity. So the fact that Esty is able to do this overnight is, obviously for cinematic reasons, I think it would. But Deborah Feldman takes years to leave. She first moves to upstate New York with her husband. They move to a less restrictive community. And it's only after she gets into a car accident. And by the way, she has a baby with her husband, and it's only after she gets into a car accident that she realizes, I can't live like this anymore. And then she leaves. So, and that difference is really important because my colleagues who do work on Jews who leave, on ultra-Orthodox Jews who leave, and I'm thinking of Dr. Zalman Neufeld and Dr. Ayala Fader, who both have new books out. I can recommend them. They both write of the gradual process of leaving and the fact that people, even once they've left, once they have both feet out the door, they're still in many ways connected to the community. Whether they still have conversations with siblings or parents, or they still attend a wedding, or they have new nieces and nephews that they want to visit, or maybe they have kids that they want to have relationships with. So, not only does it take years and years and years to leave a Haredi lifestyle, it also, there's a question about whether people really leave. And
Michal,
yeah.
Once someone leaves the community, what's it like for them to go back into that community to maintain these relationships? Like, what is it like from the community side, but also for them maybe?
Yeah, a lot of that, it's a great question. A lot of that depends on the community. There was a great documentary that came out a couple of years ago called One of Us. And I checked, it's still available if you want to, maybe on Amazon, maybe, or Netflix. But it does track the relationships that people are able to maintain or not able to maintain. And some communities are really resistant to having anybody who has left still be involved because they could, kind of tempt others to leave, right? Particularly women with children. There are a number of communities that are very resistant to having a mother who does not live a Haredi life anymore maintain a relationship with her children. That's considered just a very not welcome situation. But that just gets me to the piece of the show that I thought was the most authentic, and then I'll get to your question. The part that I thought was most authentic was sort of the second to last scene where Esty is singing with her for her audition. And the song that ultimately evokes the most emotion from her, the one that feels most authentic, the one where she's really able to show her range, her true self, is this Hasidic song that she, right from her wedding, right? This song that when we all saw her wedding, we thought it was a traumatic day for her, but it's a song that's so deeply embedded in her identity, and the dream of being able to get married and live a quote unquote normal Hasidic life was so strong and still remains strong to a certain degree. I thought that in that way, that scene really captured for me what, somebody who leaves or lives within a Haredi life really, feels in a very deep way. So what is life like for Esty? It is not easy at all to have a mother who's left, a father who, we think suffers from alcoholism, being raised by grandparents. And we see this play out in how hard it is for Esty, because she doesn't have many matches. I'm now blanking on his name, but the man that she ultimately marries, seems to be her only option. And that's really significant. When I was doing my research, women spoke of multiple match dates that they went on, to try to find the right fit. And they would ask strategic questions about, what kind of family they wanted to have and whether they would work outside the home and whether he would stay in yeshiva and adult kollel for his whole life, what kind of school they would send their kids to, whose parents would they live near, all of these kind of important practical questions for marriage. And they'd get to know each other, they'd talk a little bit. And I mean, one woman who I spoke to, one Haredi woman, had 21 suitors before she found a match. And so that's partially because she, came from a good lineage, and Esty doesn't. There are any number of things that can damage somebody's chances of marriage. So a history of mental illness in the family, definitely somebody who leaves. For a while, before we had, genetic testing that would permit, would allow somebody to know, what possible anomalies that are in their genetic code. It was having a sibling or a nephew or a niece with some sort of genetic anomaly that would really prevent somebody from being able to match well. Now couples do genetic testing anonymously before they're even paired up, and the matchmaker will call the company and say, I want to pair up number 71 with number 39. Is that a good match? And the company will say, yes, that's a good match. We're not going to see anything. So, that's eliminated a lot of the problems with the matchmaking. We could offer a disabilities rights critique of that, but that's eliminated a lot of problems with the matchmaking. So Esty is definitely in a tough spot. Which is why, she's inspected so carefully, right? Why, her in-laws spy on her in the supermarket, right?
Yeah.
And probably why, she's kind of watched so carefully afterwards. In my experience, in my research, women did not talk about their mothers-in-law as such involved people in their lives. Their mothers, yes, but not their mothers-in-law. So perhaps that's because Esty's mother was not around. Perhaps it's, in other words, she needed a mother in her life, but perhaps it's also because, the in-laws were not totally sure about her. Not having a child that first year of marriage would still hold a decent amount of stigma in the Haredi world. I have not heard of people getting involved in their sex life to the extent that, again, her mother-in-law does, but I think we're seeing a trope of sort of evil Haredi mother-in-law that is, brought to the nth degree. But definitely young couples are expected to be pregnant within their first year. And when I was doing my research, the other thing that we see with Esty is a lack of sexual education. I spent a lot of time in ultrasound clinics in Jerusalem that cater to a Haredi population. And a number of times women came in right after, like a month or two after marriage, and they got an ultrasound scan and the technician said, "You're pregnant." And they were kind of shocked, right? I didn't know I could get pregnant. How did I get pregnant? Because the biological conversation is considered immodest until they're married. So they're not entirely sure biologically how they get pregnant. Now, a lot of people who are not Haredi are also not sure how they got pregnant. So I don't mean, that's not sort of a whole critique of the Haredi world. but there's a, they don't talk about it. We have insufficient sex education in America as well, but, they don't talk about it. And so they don't know, and they're shocked when they get pregnant. But I often did see young brides, who, 1 or 2 months after their wedding, they were pregnant already.
Is Estes like sex ed education typical of like what they receive, or is there more of a class or more to it?
Yeah, so she did receive a little bit before she got married, right? Directly from somebody. Yeah, so most of them will receive a class, a one-on-one class from usually a rebbitzin or rabbi's wife. There are some nurses who like Haredi nurses who will give classes also one-on-one. And that just kind of depends who you go to, depends on, who your mother might pick out for you or who your sister went to for her class. And, they'll give a little bit. And actually there's some great new research out now that explores the kind of education that men are getting also.
Because we don't see that.
Right.
Yankee, I think is
Yankee, right.
Yankee.
Right. So, there's great new research now about the kind of sex education that men are getting, and they are getting more. And what's interesting now is that they're actually getting from their Rosh Yeshiva, from the rabbi who's the head of their yeshiva, they get more of an education about how to emotionally support their wives. And that's now expected of them in a way that a generation ago it was not. There was not a lot of talk about women being unhappy in marriages, and the need to develop a real sense of couplehood, right? Because think about it, if you don't really know somebody, you meet a couple of times, you get married, and then all of a sudden you have a baby, there's not a lot of time to develop that relationship, to develop a sense of what in Hebrew is called zugiyut, right? This sense of couplehood, right? A real relationship. So that takes a few children until they develop that relationship. But for some people, that can really be too long. So now there's been a bigger push by Haredi social workers who are seeing a lot of marital just unhappiness, to kind of push in the opposite direction and to say, rabbis, you really have to say that this is important, and you have to teach the husbands how to do this as well.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. What else?
So what do you think about Estes' marriage? We see some intimacy, but we also see that there's a lot of problems there. How much of that is reflective of like true life for them, for a Hasidic couple?
Yeah, in my research, I interviewed women who had already had at least 3 pregnancies. And when they tell me about their first 2 pregnancies, there is a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of not talking about things. They don't know how to talk about things together. Because they grow up in really gender segregated groups, they don't know how to talk to somebody of the opposite sex. They don't have experience doing it. And particularly talk about things as intimate as, right, sex and bodies and pregnancy. I mean, that stuff really takes a long time until you can feel vulnerable enough with somebody. So when I saw women, when I first met them, they had already kind of overcome that period. But a lot of them talked about that period of just feeling like they don't really know what they're doing. They can't talk to their husbands about it, and they live very separate lives from their husbands. So, and then there's a lot of, taboo about talking about pregnancy, or they're not going to talk to their friends or their family about their sex life. So, all of those things do kind of create just sometimes unpleasant situations. But by the time I spoke to them, they had all been kind of on the other side and had developed really warm, loving relationships with their spouses. And it reminded me of, kind of Yankee and Esther at the end, right? When they have this really like emotive and deep connection, and all they want is to make each other happy. So that resonated too.
Yeah, for sure. I think about that scene where she's walking out of her building. I think it's right before she leaves the community, and she's like walking through strollers.
Right.
And how hard that must have been for her every day to potentially walk through that.
Yes. Think about, I'm sure some of us on this call have struggled with infertility or know people who have struggled with infertility. And it can be, even outside of the Haredi world, a really painful experience because all of a sudden you see babies everywhere.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to be getting pregnant except for you. And that can be really terrible and traumatic of an experience. And for Esty especially, right? Everybody knew she'd been married for a year. And didn't have one of those strollers. And the stroller becomes a mark of status in many ways, right? Having a baby, and this is something that I write about a lot, whereas we might think that Haredi women, due to the expectation that they should be having babies all the time, right? They're kind of baby machines, right? Is often the phrase. And that's what Esty's friend in Germany refers to her as, right? A baby machine. Now, of course, this is especially hurtful to Esty because she couldn't get pregnant. But it also doesn't really capture the power that women have when they are able to get pregnant in the Haredi world. Right? That is the moment where they are seen as authoritative and they can, right? They've actualized the identity that they're supposed to be. They've sort of reached their full self. And every time they get pregnant, this is how, the women I spoke to, this is what they talk about a lot. Every time they get pregnant, they have more and more authority to make decisions about pregnancy, to ignore their rabbis, to not ask their husbands questions, to do what feels right to them, because having a baby is such a prized experience that it is at those moments that that Haredi women are able to really feel the full weight of their identities. So even Esty, right? She's so tiny. Shira Haas is just perfectly typecast for this character because she's just tiny, right? And in contrast to the swelling of pregnant women, right? She takes up no space. She's teeny tiny. She's right. She can kind of squeeze through all the strollers in a way that, right? And so that identity is very much embodied in her as well.
With pregnancy comes some also ownership of your own body, it seems like. What kinds of things do you, in your research, were women trying to decide about that maybe they would have gone to their rabbis that they then felt empowered to make that decision?
Great question. So there are a lot of questions that they are expected to ask the rabbi. And this has been a change over the last 3 decades or so, that it used to be that rabbis had authority over, you would ask your rabbi about ritual things, right? How do I make this pot kosher? How much matzah do I need to eat on Passover, right? Things like that. Then rabbis started answering questions they started answering a lot of medical questions. So there are now rabbis or representatives of the rabbis who are medical experts, right? Who have kind of read a lot and still do a lot of reading of medical journals to find out best practices. And rabbis know which doctors are the ones to recommend in which countries, et cetera, et cetera. So women are expected to ask their rabbis questions about whether they should get an ultrasound. Now, ultrasounds are, the rabbis view ultrasounds, Hasidic rabbis view ultrasounds as problematic because there is a Hasidic belief that you're not supposed to see what's hidden. What's hidden is supposed to be hidden until God reveals it. So other rabbis maintain that, why would you get an ultrasound if you're not going to do anything about the results? Meaning, if the ultrasound reveals there's a problem with the fetus, you're not going to get an abortion anyway because they think Haredi Jews don't get abortions. And so, okay. They're expected to ask their rabbis for any prenatal test, if they should get a diabetic test, this something. They're expected to ask them about birth control, whether they can go on birth control and what kind of birth control. They're expected to ask them if they can have an abortion or not. And there's a certain dynamic because a lot of rabbis are known for their positions on certain things. So some rabbis are known to give out birth control easier than others, or permission for birth control easier than others. Others are known to be more permissive on abortion, for instance. So a woman might go to a particular rabbi in order to get the answer that she wants. Or she might decide, and that, by the way, is her making the choice, right? She's made the choice before she went to the rabbi and then decided which rabbi she would go to. Or she might decide, I don't need to ask my rabbi. I like seeing the ultrasound. It makes me feel better, right? And the pregnancy I have too much anxiety during the pregnancy, but the ultrasound makes me feel better about it. So I'm going to get the ultrasound regardless of what my rabbi says.
And they just wouldn't show it to they wouldn't bring it home?
Right. So I was accompanying this woman once to get an ultrasound, and we walked out she walked out with the picture, and she's admiring it like many women do when they leave the ultrasound clinic. They're admiring it. And all of a sudden she sees her rabbi's wife across the street, and she quickly stuffed it into her purse,
Wow.
Because she was afraid that her rabbi's wife might tell her husband, who then might say to her own husband at the yeshiva, you're really not supposed to be getting ultrasounds. So, wow. Yeah.
So here's a question. And then I have another random, not anything to do with this question, but along these lines. So you mentioned that a lot of the younger people have testing before they're matched up, so they know. So that kind of testing is okay. But other testing, so I'm assuming that's some Tay-Sachs and some of these horrible genetic, right? So how do they justify that kind of testing? But then we get to other prenatal testing, like the diabetes test or whatever that is. Can you I don't even know if that's a real, how do they?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a huge panel of genetic diseases that they test for. I know even just 10 years ago, there were 12 genetic diseases for Ashkenazi Jewish women. Yep. And now there's 24. I mean, it grows exponentially. I see there's a question here that I'm going to get to about infertility treatments, insemination, et cetera. And this is how I'm going to answer it. The answer is that Haredi Jews are not anti-science or anti-technology. Mm-hmm. They use science and medicine and technology extensively. So there's a well-known fertility organization in Israel called Pru Urvu. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Is that what it's called? No. I think it's called Pru Urvu. Yeah. But the reason why that one's interesting, first of all, is it's very well known. And it's well known because it doesn't actually provide any medical services. It just provides rabbinic consultations about infertility treatments. So they've figured out, how to administer infertility treatments such that certain religious laws are not violated. But the ultimate goal being to have babies, right? So they'll do any number of treatments, and Israel has come to support the use of fertility treatments to such a large extent that the science, the knowledge about fertility treatments has really skyrocketed in Israel, and Haredi women in Israel can get unlimited, all Israeli citizens can get unlimited fertility treatments up to the birth of, I think the last time I checked was 3 live children. So that means if it takes 1 round of IVF or if it takes 10 rounds of IVF, you get that all covered by your national health insurance. So, and Haredi women are no strangers to medical treatments. Haredi men and women are no strangers to medical treatments. There are Haredi doctors and Haredi nurses who also help the community. So how the larger question, I mean, it's sort of, they support the prenatal, the genetic testing before marriage because they support a lot of scientific and medical interventions.
Mhm.
The question about why they don't support those other things during pregnancy is largely because, they're nervous that something might lead a doctor to recommend an abortion.
Got it.
And abortion being the kind of big
Mhm.
bad boogeyman of possible pregnancies, and in many ways that functions for a lot of Israelis. And there's been other research done on the fact that prenatal testing in Israel is meant to be diagnostic. It's not meant to be. I don't know if any of you have seen ultrasound, 3D ultrasound, like stores in the mall.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah. So
Whoa. Really? In
yeah.
the mall?
So back when people used to go to malls,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
now feels like it's going to be a historical note. Back when people used to go to malls, there were certain malls where you could go get a cosmetic ultrasound. You'd go in and get to see pictures of your baby, and that was really enjoyable, and it was really just social. But that doesn't exist in Israel. The Haredi woman would not avail herself of that either. It would be within a medical framework, but she'd do it possibly for social reasons. So yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So shifting gears just for a minute, I love hearing you talk about this because I know it's your research and it's so interesting. We have another question. It was kind of tied into just a little bit of a shift. So we have Esty, and this, she's set up with her husband. So the question is, does anyone get to choose their spouse, or is everyone in a prearranged marriage? But I was going to kind of tack onto that also the idea that he wanted a divorce. What does that mean for Esty sort of within her community as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so they do have a good amount of choice. Esty didn't, because she was kind of had so many things against her already, so many strikes against her already. So she didn't have much of a choice. You even see that, right before she goes in, I think right before she goes into that room to meet her husband, right? There's a lot of pressure on her. It's kind of like, you better like this person because this is going to be your only shot. And they have such a sweet interaction at the beginning. She's like, I'm a little different, and he says, I like different. I mean, it's very sweet. Yeah. So I did get a sense that they chose each other. And one thing I talk about a lot is the fact that there's one reaction to this show, which is, thank God Esty left, right? She left this terrible, patriarchal, miserable society where she had no choices whatsoever. And she chose to leave and enter the world of, free choice and agency and all of these things. And I hear that. I hear that viewing of the show, and that sort of, feminist rah-rah for Esty. And I would also caution us to remember that all of us are making choices within constraints. That Estes and women who live in conservative religious traditions perhaps have more constraints than others. But very few of us are living lives of complete free choice. Right? That notion is something that feminist scholarship has kind of given up, right? And now, instead of bemoaning these patriarchal religious traditions, we try to understand them more and understand the constraints that surround Esty, but then see how they make choices within those constraints. So, that's why I do see, yes, Esty didn't seem to have other matches laid out for her. And there was absolutely a lot of pressure put on her. That's, constraints that were surrounding her in this match. But at least you get the sense from that interaction that they did somehow choose each other, right? That they chose to get married in that way and to at least try to have an open, loving relationship, even though there were a few things that stymied that along the way. The fact that her husband wanted to divorce her, if she had stayed in the Haredi world, that would have been another strike against her. I think it would have been very hard for her to get married again after that. Especially because of her physical problems with sex. So, I think that the rumor mill is very strong in tight-knit communities. And I think it would have been very, very hard for her to get married. Not being Haredi, I don't think it mattered since she was getting a divorce.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have some great questions. They don't relate to each other at all. So you can probably see the one in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the more interesting characters was the man who went to bring Esty home. What do you think of him? What brought him back? Because he had left the community and come back. And what's his standing now that he has come back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my colleague, Dr. Ayala Fader, who has written about people who leave, has said she has never met characters like this. She's done a lot of research with people who are leaving or have left and returned. And this was a constructed character for the sake of the TV series. He's definitely entertaining, although I mean, just from a storyline, I have no clue what's going on with him. I mean,
right.
It's not even clear to me. Why does he like abduct her in the car and then take her and leave the gun? I have no clue. It's like that whole scene. It was like, what is going on? The whole thing is a mess. Right. He has the fact that he has the phone, right? So a few things. So a lot of Haredi Jews do have cell phones. They use cell phones. They use kosher cell phones, which is what Yankee has, right?
Yeah.
Yankee has a kosher cell phone, which has been scrubbed of any access to bad internet stuff, right? Whereas this other gentleman has a non-kosher cell phone, probably signaling the fact that he's, not totally kosher himself. Right. Yeah, he's a character. I mean,
yeah. Do you think they would have tried so hard to get her back if she wasn't pregnant?
Right. That's an interesting question.
I kind of wondered that because it really made me uncomfortable that they were chasing after her.
Yeah.
Especially since this is clearly her choice and.
Right. I don't know. I think definitely the pregnancy adds, going back to what I said at the beginning, the fact that women with children are, it's harder. People are more scared about a mother influencing her children in a sort of non-Haredi life. Mm-hmm. And so if that meant that Yankee's son would grow up in this secular German lifestyle, then yeah, that would be that I could see as a much stronger driving force to getting her home.
So another question on a totally different track is, what about vaccinations in the Haredi community as compared, in and of themselves in Israel, but also as compared to communities in the United States?
Yeah, that's great. And so there's been a lot of talk about the vaccinations among Haredi communities. And the vast majority of Haredim do vaccinate. There was a great book that just came out that I just read that I will put in the chat. Ben Castan, Kosher Bodies. And that's based on work he did with Haredi Jews in Manchester, England. And what he writes about is the fact that the fight over vaccinations between Haredi Jews and doctors is significantly a fight over systems of authority. So, and vaccinations in the past, 2 decades, because of the misinformation that was out there, there's mistrust of the medical field. And I see this also in my research with Haredi women. There's a lot of suspicion regarding doctors. right? What are their interests? Why are they advocating I do X, Y, Z? And significantly, that's because Haredim operate under a different system of authority. And among the Haredim in England that my colleague Dr. Ben Castan researched with, the other problem is that those enforcing the vaccination regulations are representatives of the state. And Haredim already have a tense relationship with the state because the state wants Haredim to assimilate more, and Haredim don't want to assimilate more. And so vaccinations become this flashpoint for some Haredi communities where they feel the need to push back against the authority of the state. Whereas one of the suggestions that's been made by policymakers, and that worked, by the way, in the vaccination crisis of, who can tell time anymore, but was it, maybe it was just 7 months ago, who knows? But very recently, there was the measles outbreak in Haredi communities. Right. What ultimately worked in convincing Haredi Jews that they needed to vaccinate their children was to get people from within the community, right, to get Haredi nurses to advocate for vaccination and to tell them in language that they understood, in a trusting relationship, why they should vaccinate. So it's less about the vaccines themselves. It's definitely not about the rejection of medicine. As I've said, they're welcome and opening of medical interventions and scientific knowledge. It's more about what vaccinations have come to represent for some Haredi Jews, and that is this sort of strong arm authority of the state.
So I assume because this is such a tight, close-knit community that maybe they had a circle of doctors or a network that maybe they talked about, that they went to, or the rabbis recommended. Is that the case? Or are these doctors outside of what their normal community is, and so there's this tension?
Yeah, no, so part of the reason the women I interviewed were suspicious of the doctors is because the doctors that had been recommended to them were recommended by the rabbis. Now, how does a rabbi come to recommend a specific doctor? Sometimes it's because they're the best doctor in X field. Sometimes it's because it's a doctor who will defer to the authority of the rabbi. So maybe that's a rabbi, a woman's in labor and a rabbi says, and the doctor says she needs to have a C-section, and the rabbi says, no, she really can't have a C-section. And the doctor says, okay, fine, we'll see what else we can do. Maybe it's a doctor who's going to, if a woman comes and says, I want to go on birth control, and the doctor says, well, have you asked your rabbi? That's the kind of doctor that then gets more recommendations from the rabbi.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So there's another question along different lines. You mentioned the stigma to Esty about, how she had trouble having sex with her husband, and that it doesn't seem like maybe she would have had trouble getting pregnant if it had been easier to have sexual relations with her husband. Right. But you mentioned that when it came to remarriage, is there any stigma to the husband, or would the women talk about, if this divorce had gone through and they had stayed in the community, would the women talk about Yanki as, this kind of partner, this kind of person?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll answer it with what I do know. So when infertility treatments were first became widely used in Israel, there was still a lot of opposition to sperm donation. And still, Israel has some really, I think now they only allow sperm donation from outside of Israel.
Really?
Yeah, because I think we'd have to check on this now. Okay. But the last time I checked, this was the case, because there's a concern about siblings. Egg donation, by the way, also is a really kind of complicated topic in Israel. And it's possible that egg donation is not permitted at all, but I'd have to check on that again. But that's partially because these communities are so insular, and that's all over Israel. That's not just Haredi. They're so insular that there'd be a real concern that siblings would end up marrying one another. right. So somebody wrote, my friend's got an egg donation in Israel from a Jewish woman in South Africa. Right. But not internal to Israel. So you could get an egg donation, it seems, but not from somebody within Israel. And also for a while, problems with men's fertility were also stigmatized. And this we see actually globally, men's fertility was under-researched for a long time after women's fertility had been, researched quite a bit. So there's just a lot of stigma around this. I don't think people would talk about Yankees, sexual prowess, but there might be a concern about his fertility that would kind of quietly be floating around.
So they would know. It could float around.
It could float around. It would depend on, what year it is, really. I mean, this year, there might be more of an awareness of men's problem with fertility. 10, 15 years ago, maybe not. There was also a question about why a rabbi would prohibit a C-section. So I just want to get to that really quickly. Yeah. So the primary reason is because many doctors won't do more than 3 or 4 C-sections, and many doctors won't allow vaginal birth after C-section, depending on, the type of surgical incision and things like that. So in short, having a C-section for a Haredi woman can sometimes limit the number of children she ends up having. Wow. And when women are expected to have somewhere between 6 and 8 children, or that's usually the fertility rate among Haredi women, if she has a C-section for a second pregnancy, she may not have too many more. Now, obviously, that's not always the case. I met women, a woman who had a C-section for twins for numbers 13 and 14, and she went on to have 16, 17 children. So, that's not always the case, but that's a fear that having a C-section is going to limit the number of children that you have.
And that's true in life. Like, I've had 2 C-sections, and I remember when I had my first one, because I had to, it was an emergency C-section. When I went in for the twins, my doctor said, "Are you planning on having any more children? Because it's not good for your body to have multiple C-sections."
Right.
So I get that. Yeah.
Right. Actually, another book I'd recommend is, you're getting my whole summer library right now. Chavi Karkowski. I think I'm spelling her name right. Dr. Chavi Karkowski is a medical doctor who is a maternal fetal medicine specialist. And she just put out this book that came out. She was supposed to be on a big tour right when COVID hit. So she's now giving a lot of talks. I recommend and talk her book as well, but she writes about different types of births and the medical field and things like that. Not religious. I mean, she's Jewish, but it's not religious. It's not a religiously oriented book.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. So someone asked, will Esti's baby be recognized in the Haredi community after the divorce? So let's say, like, we go on through this life where she stays away from the community. She has this baby without her husband, and they have a divorce. What's the relationship like then?
So she raises the baby?
I guess so. I don't know. Okay, we don't really know.
If she raises the baby, I would like to think that her immediate family would love that baby and be supportive of Esti, whatever immediate family is left.
Yankee's family.
Based on the story we learn about Yankee's family, I doubt that. But okay, yeah. But I mean Esti's side of the family, and I would like to think that Yankee has an open heart and would love this child and all of these things. But I think in the larger community, this baby probably would not have a place.
And they would not go back to the community for them to like meet the baby, or if there was
maybe, the thing is that it gets at what I was saying before about people who leave, right? There are some people who leave who are able to maintain relationships with their family, or to attend celebrations. And it's because of the dynamics of their family, right? All family dynamics are different. Sometimes we're not welcome at our siblings' celebrations for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with leaving the Haredi world, right? So a lot of that's going to depend on the internal family dynamics. But And it's just important to say that all of these families are as different from each other as we are from each other. And, you know, that's just the truth for them also.
Do you think Esty would have left if her mom hadn't have left? Is there some sort of theme there that like she got this in her head because of her mom? Or like, I guess also how many people end up leaving the community? Is this like a common story or?
Right. I don't have numbers on that. And the people who've studied this don't have numbers on that either. It's not something that's, you know, it's not something that the Haredi world publishes. But, did she leave because her mom left?
Not because of her mom, but do you think that like her mindset is so because she saw this that then like when it was, you know?
Right. So it's interesting. So somebody else I was talking to about the show said that their favorite scene was the very last scene because, right, it's when she's in the coffee shop and her friends come. And what is Esty really looking for? She's looking for a community, right? She's looking for her people, whoever her people are. And she doesn't feel like she really belongs with the Haredi world where she grew up. But she looks for her people. She goes to Berlin to find her mom, right?
Yeah.
Despite it's almost kind of right. Is it to find her mom? Is it, or right, because of her citizenship? Is it right? All of these sort of questions. But maybe she's just looking for her people. And maybe that longing is because she didn't grow up with her mom. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I was just kind of wondering if like families that have someone who leaves, are they more sensitive to this and so they become more insular? Or, I mean, do they talk about it or what's that like?
Right. So having somebody who leaves is a mark of, right, a stigma, right? So I don't think there's a whole lot of talking about it that goes on. Can I ask a question of the people who are watching?
Sure, please.
I'm really curious why people think the show has generated so much attention. I have a couple ideas, but I'm really curious what other people got out of the show. So if folks want to kind of comment or why they're so interested in the show, or you know, I don't know if people, or maybe Karen, if you have thoughts, why do you think people are so interested in the show?
Well, you know, we kind of talked about this because I think we have to throw in Shtisel maybe a little bit too. I'm not sure about, I haven't seen, like, we just started Falda, so I don't know like where that plays, but there seems to be this genre of like television that's really interesting and captivating. Yeah, I don't know if I have like a good, let's see, what did someone interested to see another part of the Jewish world? We love the mystery. Also, I don't know about the Hasidic sects and their difference. It is fascinating. I agree, to get sort of a window into this world, even if it's not a perfect window, as I think, you know, we've understood tonight. I've been to like Mea Shearim and some of these communities, but you don't really feel what it's like to live there.
Right.
So much mystery. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, they wanted to learn. Right. Yeah. So I think there's a great desire to learn about this community that seems so foreign, right? And just so different. And at the same time feels kind of part of us, right? If you identify as Jewish, it feels nostalgic in some ways, except foreign at the same time. But I also think about, I mean, there's so much Jews on TV now. It's not right. It's Shtisel, so Shtisel, I think, is an important counterpoint for this reason. And why I would advocate for those who really liked Unorthodox to watch Shtisel. Unorthodox is the story of someone who left. So it's the story of somebody who wasn't happy being Haredi. Right, Srugim is also about these Israeli shows about Orthodox Jews have become very popular now. So Unorthodox is a story of somebody who left. So you're going to get a story of somebody who's not happy. You're going to get a picture of the Haredi world that is dark and miserable and lacking happiness. Okay. Shtisel, you're getting a dynamic picture of the Haredi world from people who live there, right? And I recognize it's not based on, a memoir, but there are certain elements that are really authentic, and in Shtisel. And so Shtisel, and by the way, one of the important things that I think Unorthodox what they want to say in Unorthodox is that the only way that Esti can exercise her artistic talent is by leaving the Haredi world. And there are a lot of Haredi female artists who are vocal artists, who are musicians, who are painters. So that whole story of you can't be really art is a stand-in for individual, right? You can't be an individual, you can't be different and be Haredi. In reality, there are a lot of Haredi artists. I can point folks to some if they want. If folks are on Instagram, Dobie Baum is great to follow. She does concerts just for women. She's really wonderful. Anyway, and Shtisel shows you a picture of, right, he is an artist and he is Haredi and he struggles with the tension, but he doesn't think of leaving the Haredi world, right? He finds a way to sort of meld these identities. And that's why I think Shtisel is in many ways also a really important window into the Haredi world.
I'm glad you said that about art, because I kind of thought she left because her talent was music. I know that that's not true to Deborah Feldman's story, right, that they picked a different career for Esti. But I was wondering if it's because she liked to sing and because hearing a woman's voice like has its own problems in the community, if that was it. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely this multi-layered part of the voice thing, right? It is that one of the things that a lot of people know about the Haredi religious life is that women are not permitted to sing in public in front of men. And so her singing becomes this opportunity to not be Haredi. To sing in front of men is to not be Haredi anymore. But it's also a sort of classic coming of age story of a young woman finding her voice, right? You're literally and figuratively.
Romanticized.
Yeah, it's romanticized and it's beautiful. And that's what a TV show is supposed to do. And it makes us feel things. And that's wonderful. And it makes us curious. Everybody who's here tonight is now curious and learning more about the Haredim. So I think the TV show did a great job.
Yeah, I do too. I love that it sparked all these discussions and this desire to learn more about this community in like an authentic way that we can like understand.
Right. Absolutely.
So we have a few minutes. I have a couple other questions across the board. And I don't know if you have answers to these. Do more women or men leave the community? And on another note, under what circumstances would a rabbi give permission for birth control? Future talk about Shtisel,
that'd be great. Shtisel's, so the third season's supposed to come out in the fall.
I know.
I'm very excited. Okay. Do more men than women leave? Right. So the colleagues I know have done this work say that more men than women leave.
Really?
And that's partially because it's harder for women who already have children to leave because they wouldn't be permitted to see their children and all of these things.
That's not true for men.
Right. It's unclear to me with this argument whether the assumption is that the men don't want to see their children or that it's not entirely clear. But those who have done this research say they do much more research with men who have left.
Oh, interesting.
In terms of why would a rabbi give permission for birth control? So there are a lot of reasons why a rabbi would give permission for birth control. There's one very relevant reason why a rabbi would not give permission for birth control, and this is usually the time when women make this decision on their own. And a rabbi would not give permission for birth control if you say, I can't afford to have another baby. This is like the third rail of reproductive politics in the Haredi world. Even though so much of the Haredi world lives below the poverty line, that not being able to afford another baby is a huge reason for women not wanting to get pregnant. And the women I spoke to who were on birth control or who had been on birth control or who got abortions, it was usually a combination of I was exhausted, I had a lot of other children, and coupled with I work outside the home. My husband's in kollel in yeshiva all day, and I work. This is an Israeli phenomenon, but I work outside the home, and I'm raising these children, and I know that I, number one, don't have the energy, and number two, we can't afford another child right now. So not having enough energy, not sort of, if a woman has already had a number of children and she needs a break, rabbis like to refer to this as sort of pregnancy spacing instead of pregnancy limitation.
Okay.
So if you can say, I want to space my pregnancies a little bit more, then they'll permit it.
For a certain amount of time, or
right.
until the woman decides she doesn't want it anymore?
Right. So rabbis will say you have permission for 6 months, and in 6 months you have to come back to me and we'll discuss it again, and maybe you'll get permission again and maybe you won't. However, the women I spoke to who had been on birth control after their third pregnancy or so stop asking their rabbi if they can go on birth control.
Huh.
They decide when they want birth control, and there are a whole lot of ways also to avoid getting pregnant. So they exercise a number of avoidance techniques in order to avoid getting pregnant and not asking the rabbi for birth control. And by the way, not having to take the serious hormones of, a combined oral contraceptive, because the oral contraceptive is considered the one that is most legally appropriate for a Haredi woman. So that's serious hormones. If you want to avoid the hormones, you got to figure out other ways to avoid getting pregnant.
So you mentioned about Haredi women working outside of the home, which from my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is more of a new thing that's like happening in Haredi families because the men are studying and they need income. How does that work when you have like children, pregnancies? Are they network with each other, or what's that like for them?
Great question. So it actually, in the modern creation of the Haredi society in Israel, so from the 1950s onward, the idea was that women would be trained as teachers so that they could teach in the Haredi school system and support their husbands who were in the yeshiva all day. So what's changed is the large percentage now of Haredi women who are in the workforce and the places in which they work. So now secular, modern Orthodox and Haredi women are all in the workforce in about the same amount. About 77% of all Israeli women are in the workforce. And so 75% of Haredi women, 75% of secular women, all in the workforce. Except Haredi women work a lot more part-time. So that's to answer your question about how they do that. So they'll work while their kids are in school and then they come home. So they don't have those extended hours. If not, their moms are taking care of the kids, or there's an older kid at home who's taking care of the younger ones when they get home from school until mom gets home. Or now, more increasingly, men are coming home from their day of learning and taking care of the kids until mom gets home from work. So that's some of what's going on. They ran out of jobs in the educational sector. So more Haredi women are getting advanced training in medicine, technology, computers, things like this, and getting jobs far outside the Haredi world, actually. And that has become an interesting tension to Haredi as well.
Does it change the family dynamics at all, or does it just change the community?
So it can change the community because, think about it. She now works in an office with people who are not Haredi. And, there's a lot of, talk and information shared and encountering other people that wouldn't happen if she stayed in the educational system. And she's going to university now. And so there are Haredi universities, that cater to Haredi women and men. Fewer men are entering the yeshiva now. So there are a lot of economic changes that are going on in the Haredi world. I think I'm glad my book is coming out now, but because I think in 10 years it's going to be outdated. Unfortunately, I think it's gonna preserve a particular moment in history, but I think in 10 years, I could write a totally different book of what's going on in the Haredi world.
Interesting. Because of these changes.
Yeah, because of these changes.
So what, and this might be our final question. So if you have any final questions, you should post them now so I can throw them all out there. Is there respect for these women? I assume there's support because they're trained within their communities, but like, are the men, I guess they're okay with this? Like the husbands and the community?
Yeah, there's they're not challenging because they're not seen as challenging any of the Haredi religious norms, right? They are actually, by working outside the home, they're supporting their husbands to continue learning. And yeah, that's what's really, this is encouraged and supported, and there are organizations that support it, right? They created Haredi colleges so that the women would have sort of a modest, appropriate place to go to learn the skills that they need to know for the workforce. I mean, that's a lot of support. There are a number of things that are not supported, like for a number of years, Haredi women have tried to run in a political party in the Israeli Knesset, and that is has received a lot of pushback.
Why?
Well, the Haredi political parties are solely male, and they don't want women challenging, so they have not allowed women to run within their platform, and they don't want women splitting the Haredi vote either.
Does that have to do with listening to a woman's voice also? Like, clearly they'd have to speak
right.
about.
No, I think, it's interesting. Right. Because this prohibition went from singing to just talking and giving a speech. And I don't think so. I think it has to do with seating power.
Got it. This is their realm still.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask about that also because we didn't really see that with Esty. We saw like a glimpse of, pieces of her life, but we don't get that whole sense of like what her life would be like if she had stayed in the Hasidic community.
Right. There's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of warmth. Esty got the short end of the stick for any number of reasons. And, and that's really terrible. And I can't say that never happens. But it is the story of somebody who left and not somebody who stayed. So
that's important. I didn't talk about that with Shtisel also, because you're right. That's really important to get a picture of this community.
Right.
I don't see any final questions, but I can't thank you enough for spending 2 evenings with us. You want to give a final plug for your book coming out?
Yeah, can I? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put the link in the chat. I should just have this pulled up, but I always have to search for it on Amazon. Hold on. I'll do another plug to donate for Sister Song for reproductive.
I did post that.
Great. Thank you, for reproductive justice. And here is the Amazon link to my book. The cover was designed by a good friend of mine. And you couldn't see the cover on Amazon for a while. It was like you could pre-order already starting in last January, but the cover wasn't up there. So the cover only showed up in the last couple of weeks. So now it feels more real. Every time it feels more real. So I'm happy to come talk about the book a little bit more. I'm happy to talk about Shtisel. It's been so fun chatting with you, and maybe at some point, hopefully soon, I'll be able to meet the people on the other end of this call, We
would love that. We would love to do something in person when time presents itself. But it's been so wonderful, spending this time with you and hearing about your research. And I can't thank you enough for being with us and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Stay well. If people want to ask me more questions, I'll put my email address in here too.
And you can also email me and I can send them to Michal anytime.
Great.
As well. So thank you so much. We will talk soon.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, good. Be well.